Hello there. I'm Rob Kasky, proudly engaging in storytelling, and I want to share with you a story today about a man who is really regarded as the father and the founder of the Zulu people and the Zulu army as we understand it, with its long and illustrious history. Long time ago, but not very far from here, not all that far in fact from Melmoth in northern KwaZulu-Natal, there took place a roadside dalliance between a chief of the Ilangeni clan called Zenzangakona and a nubile young Zulu maiden called Mnandi. Now the Zulus have a word for this. They call it ukohlabanga, the pleasures of the road. But indeed, pregnancy should never arise close to home. We are not sure of exactly when Shaka was born, but it is considered to be around the year 1787. And when Mnandi's belly began to swell as a result of this pregnancy, her deriders immediately christened the as yet unborn child Shaka, which indeed is a beetle that causes irregularities in a woman's cycle. It's quite a derogatory name. And when this illegitimate child was born, he was given the name of Shaka, which is derogatory from the outset. Mnandi's people had insisted that the Ilangeni clan and Zenzangakona's people take her and her child in. This woman and her child were ostracized and alienated from the outset. The mother was stridently voiced, opinionated, and outspoken. And as a result, mother and child were really alienated by the Ilangeni clan from the moment that Shaka was born. Shaka grew up, as most young Zulu herd boys do, practically naked, tending to the cattle with his other little friends and herd boys, and unfortunately had underdeveloped genitalia, and as a result was always teased mercilessly by the other herd boys. And Shaka, as a result, became, in my opinion, Africa's first gang lord, because as he became old enough to become a bully and to begin to dominate other herd boys, so he did and formed for himself a little gang. And then with that gang, he went over the hill and dominated the herd boys in the neighboring valley and formed a bigger gang. And as a result, by the time he was a teenager, he was highly sought after and highly regarded as a warrior. And he was given succor and given refuge with the clan of the Mtatwa people under their chieftain Dingiswayo. And Shaka developed into a mighty warrior. I think these legends grow in the telling. But he was apparently fearless, a man of impressive proportions, probably 6'3" or 4" in height. There are tales that he would once tree a leopard in a tree and kill it with a spear. He was fearless on hunting expeditions and particularly in battle. And when Dingiswayo was finally overcome and defeated by the Ndwandwe clan, Dingiswayo was killed. And Shaka, who had no real authority or right to the chieftaincy of the Mtatwa clan, strode in and took over as the chief or the leader of the Mtatwa clan. It would be fair to say, of course, that any sort of resistance to his takeover would be met with a crushed skull. He was a ruthless man, and his authority would be law. And with the small Mtatwa army, he began to dominate the small tribal armies around him and create a larger army. He is the man who did away with the sandals, saying they required too much maintenance on long marches, that men were going to move barefooted. And as a result, Shaka would often lead his army on incredibly long route marches. He would lead them himself, creating a toughness in the sole of the foot, creating a very deep calloused layer, dry layer underneath the feet, and very, very fit warriors. When he would eventually catch up with the killers of Dingiswayo, the legend has it that he locked them in a hut with hyenas to deal with them at a time the hyenas found appropriate. And Shaka, as his revolutionary tactics would evolve, and as he began to develop more and more of an army, he said the idea of blocks of men approaching one another in battle and hurling insults and weapons at one another, and then the defeated side being given the option to withdraw, was nonsense. And he created a tactic of what is called impondo gomeshu, the horns of the bull or the horns of the buffalo, where younger bodies of fighting men, the horns, would run around the enemy to encircle it. And then the head and chest, ikand and esforwa, would come in to finish the enemy off. And to that end, Shaka said, no more throwing away of your weapons. We're going to smelt down our metal from these long throwing spears, and we're going to create a short-shafted, broad-bladed stabbing assegai. A bit like this one here. Here we have this short-shafted, broad-bladed stabbing assegai that the Zulus called which is the sound it makes as it goes into and is pulled from the human body. For those of you with keen eyes, you might see that this big blade has a groove running down each side. For those of you with a penchant for this sort of information, you might be interested to note that when you plunge a big cold blade like this into living flesh, it's almost impossible to withdraw. So you need these grooves to allow air in, to allow an easy extraction of your blade. These blades were not metal as we understand them today. They couldn't produce the heat required to produce top quality metal. So these blades were really pig iron. They were more like cast iron and quite brittle. And if you got it stabbed in between your assailant's ribs and he fell, the chances of breaking your beloved spear were quite high. The importance of these spears cannot be underestimated. There were blacksmiths all over Zululand making these spears. They often existed where there was areas of magoban. This is an iron ore-bearing substrate or magnet type of rock. And of course, a huge amount of wood, generally 700 kilograms of wood, is required to produce the heat to produce 1 kilogram of this pig iron or steel for their blades. And the Zulu warriors took great pride and care of their blades. They were, of course, expensive to produce. They normally paid in livestock and goats to the blacksmiths, and they took great care and pride of their great equals. And to that end, Shaka also changed the shape and the fighting tactic of the shield. The shield hitherto had been a fairly small piece of apparatus designed really for defense. And Shaka said, no, we're going to create a much larger shield like this one. This is pretty much an entire cowhide involved in the typical Zulu shield. And with this weapon, we are going to use it offensively to get under the shield of our opponent and pull him off balance to expose the left side. And then to that end, we could use the mighty ekwa with an upward thrust into what is called the engine room or the thoracic cavity of our assailant, and indeed stab into the lungs or into the heart. And Shaka, as a result, became incredibly successful as a military leader, a military genius, and a military power in southeastern Africa. And with his army began to dominate the armies around him and build a larger and larger army. Eventually, his indeed was a name that was a quiver on the lips of anybody who was not a Zulu. And then in a famous pivotal battle at Gokle Hill, Shaka would take on the dreaded and hated Ndwandwes. The Ndwandwes, he'd killed his old leader and great confidant, Dingiswayo. And Gokle Hill is about 3 miles or 5 kilometers from the nearest water source. And Shaka, with his much smaller army, would find themselves on top of the hill, expecting the Ndwandwes to attack them from all sides. But when you attack a small target, as the Zulus did later at Rorke's Drift, with a large number of men, the numbers become concertinate as you try to attack a small target. It was a dreadfully hot day. Shaka had chosen it deliberately, knowing that as the Ndwandwes began to run out of energy and run out of steam, and as their thirst would increase, they would be obliged to make a 3-mile or 5-kilometer walk back to get fresh water to relieve their thirst. And the numbers began to dwindle. The Ndwandwes' thirst for this battle began to wane, and eventually Shaka would turn his army against the Ndwandwes and chase them up to the river where they had been forced to get water. There was only one narrow crossing point across that river, and Shaka's men would overwhelm the Ndwandwes in huge numbers at the river and on the way to the river and comprehensively defeat them. Now Shaka, as his reputation grew and as his name spread all over southern Africa, is often blamed for a period in this country called the Imfekani, the crushing. Now, the crushing took place around 1816, 1817, at the time where Shaka became paramount chief of the Zulu clan. He is often erroneously called the king of the Zulu clan. He was not of royal birth, he was of illegitimate birth, and was never officially truly king of the Zulu people. He was paramount chief of the Zulu people. And you may be interested to note that in 1815, the same year as the Battle of Waterloo, there occurred in Indonesia a mighty volcanic eruption called Tambora. And Tambora spewed square kilometers of ash cloud into the atmosphere that drifted off westwards, causing major crop failures all over the eastern seaboard of Africa and indeed many parts of Europe. The Europeans termed the summer of 1815-16 the year of no oats. They used oats to feed the horses, which were their primary means of transport up to that point. And if you're interested in the development of the bicycle, you will see that the development of the bicycle advanced in strides post 1815-16 as a result of there not being enough oats to feed the horses. And this all took place because of that volcanic eruption, Tambora. And Shaka is blamed for this period of hardship. Great socio-economic issues in southern Africa are attributed to Shaka because he'd become paramount chief of the Zulus in 1816. I don't believe or hold that view. I think it has far more to do with crop failures on account of Tambora, where some clans were so desperate to survive that they resorted to cannibalism. But Shaka would lead the Zulu people initially from that tiny Mtatwa Dingiswa army for a period of 12 years. He was considered by most to be a megalomaniac, a tyrant, a man who rewarded any sort of indiscretion, generally with death. But he ruled the Zulu people with an iron fist. And his mother, Mnandi, died in 1827. Shaka, it would be fair to say, had an unusually close bond with his mother. Some would say an unnatural relationship between the two. He was terrified of heirs and as a result had no children, despite a large isikosho or harem of women, as would be the way for a paramount chief of his stature. And when Mnandi died, Shaka went berserk. He wanted his people, his nation, to feel the pain that he himself was feeling. The missionaries record that cattle were killed in large numbers. Pregnant cattle were slaughtered, their bellies slit open, and the calves, unborn calves, dragged from their bellies. Pregnant women treated the same way. The missionaries go on to record that during a single day, for the morning of Mnandi, more than 7,000 Zulu people were put to the spear. And it was probably as a result of this maniacal genocide that Shaka himself would be put to the spear. In 1828, he was approached by his two half-brothers, Mhlangan and Dingaan. They were terrified of him. They in fact attacked him from behind and stabbed him mortally. And as Shaka fell to the ground, the legend has it that he uttered the words, "You think you will rule this land, but there are white people coming in from the sea who will take this land from you." And those prophetic words have tremendous importance and outcomes in the years to come, post-1828 in Natal and indeed South Africa's history. Shaka would be wrapped in the skin of a black ox and placed in an empty grain pit. The mouth or the entrance of that grain pit plugged with rocks and clay. It stands today in the town of Stanger or Kwadakuza on Natal's east coast, not far from his royal dwelling, KwaBulawayo. And there is a marker on Cooper Street today that marks the spot where this great Zulu chieftain, a military genius, a man who was regarded as Africa's Black Napoleon, met the most ignominious of deaths at the hand of his brother or his half-brothers, Mhlangan and Dingaan. It's an incredible story. I hope you've enjoyed that, and I hope you will continue to support me and my storytelling on Patreon. Thank you very much.